Perhaps one of the most devastating murders in all of Hollywood history, Judith Eva Barsi, at only 10 years old, was the victim of a horrific murder perpetrated by a person she should have been able to love and trust entirely. But dreadfully, that was far from the case. Judith Barsi was a child actress who contributed to a lot of the childhoods of many children, even still today, but especially those who were kids in the 80s and 90s. Among some movies, television shows, and commercials, Judith lent her voice for characters in popular movies like Ducky in The Land Before Time and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Her father, Joseph Barsi, had fled from communist Hungary to New York in 1964 before he eventually went to California. It was here that he met Maria Viravax, who was also a Hungarian immigrant who had fled for similar reasons because of the Soviet occupation of their country. On June 6, 1978, Judith was born in Los Angeles, the perfect place for her to embark on her childhood career. It was Judith's mother, Maria, who had the most influence on Judith becoming an actress. She actively raised her to take on the industry to find work, and once she reached 5 years old, she was discovered at a skating rink, and from there, everything was looking up. Judith was making about $100,000 a year by the time she started 4th grade, and because of this, her family was able to afford a 3-bedroom home in Los Angeles. But while Judith's family should have been appreciative of her success, Joseph was a dangerous alcoholic and would often verbally abuse Judith and Maria, becoming worse and worse as Judith's career grew stronger. He would openly drive drunk and had been arrested a number of times for it. Joseph would often threaten to kill himself, Maria, and Judith, and at one point the threats became so frightening that Maria contacted police due to Joseph displaying acts of physical violence against her. But because police didn't see any physical signs of abuse, Maria's mind suddenly changed and she decided not to press charges, something she very well should have done. But it seemed as though Joseph had snapped out of his drunken addiction. He had stopped drinking. However, his episodes of rage persisted, and he continued to threaten to kill his family. He would say a multitude of things to them, saying he'd cut their throats or burn down the house, yet still Maria and Judith remained with him. Joseph was staunchly against his family leaving for any reason anyway. He went so far as to hide a message that was sent to Maria concerning a family member of hers that had passed away in Hungary, so she wouldn't attend the funeral and he wouldn't possibly lose her as a result. Things seemed to evolve to more physical levels as time went on, with Judith telling her friends of her father's violent outbursts, where he would hurl objects at her like pots and pans, sometimes even striking her with them and causing injury. This tremendous burden started to psychologically change Judith, and she began to exhibit strange behaviors, like plucking out her eyelashes and even her cat's whiskers. She had also been putting on a notable amount of weight. Eventually, her agent noticed her drastic change during an audition when she broke down crying, and she was sent to a child psychologist. The psychologist was able to identify that Judith had been inflicted with severe physical and emotional abuse, and she went to Child Protective Services with her findings. Maria, by this time, had rented an apartment in Panorama City and had been using it as a place to go to avoid her husband during the day. She convinced the investigators to drop their case and insisted she would be divorcing Joseph and moving into this apartment. But Maria was afraid of losing her home and belongings she found precious to her, and so she put the material value first. But on the evening of July 25, 1988, this would all accumulate into a devastating and fatal situation. Judith took a bike ride earlier that day, taking advantage of the free time away from her terrible life at home. and it was home where she never should have returned. Her father was about to make good on all of the promises he had made to harm his family. While Judith slept that night, Joseph grabbed his gun, went into her bedroom, and shot her in the head. He then found Maria and gunned her down as well. All of Maria's hope for freedom and Judith's brilliant future were shattered in that home. The home that Joseph continued to live in for the 2 days that followed, surely contemplating the decision he had made. He spoke with Judith's agent after he killed her and told him that he was going to be moving out of the home and he just needed to say goodbye to his little girl first. He then proceeded to pour gasoline on Judith and Maria's bodies and set them on fire. With the bodies incinerated, he wandered into the garage, put his .32 caliber pistol to his head, and pulled the trigger. Judith was always remembered as a brilliantly bright young girl. She was made to be a star and was able to understand even the most sophisticated of instructions when playing the many parts she played in her short time on Earth. And she will always be remembered for the light she brought to the childhoods of many, despite the darkness that overwhelmed her own. If you or someone you know is involved in domestic violence, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. I have also linked some resources in the description below. That's all for now. Now check out my other videos by pressing here, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel by pressing up here, because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.